started. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, this afternoon, on the last Chronosub panel webinar for the year. What we're here to talk about today is AI for a better user experience. And I've got a number of guest speakers here. I've not any slides for you today. I've got a couple of visuals that will show you as we go along. But the format's going to be a little bit different today, as we're trying to get our guest speakers in a bit quicker than usual to have like more of a discussion today. But as usual, love to hear from you during the webinar. So if you have any questions, any Q&A, please pop them in. I'll keep an eye on that and we can bring them into the conversation as we see fit. Also, the webinar is recorded and is free to watch on the Chronosub website afterwards. So you don't need to take loads of notes. You can just go and watch it again if you loved it so much. And if you're watching this later, thanks so much for watching. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest, Avi Steinman from Language Experts. Hi, Avi.
Hey, how you doing, Remy?
Good, thanks. And we had the pleasure of meeting in person earlier in the year in Toronto, where Avi was actually speaking on a panel on AI, weren't you?
Indeed, it was cold and wet then, and it's cold and wet now, so some things feel like they've never changed. And I want to wish a happy birthday to ChatGPT, which is 1 year old today. So I guess we'll be talking about that. It's very appropriate that we're talking today.
Very good. I didn't know that. I'm badly prepared, I am. So you run Academic Language Experts. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually have been running Academic Language Experts for the last decade, and it was what is probably familiarly known as an author services company. So we help researchers in the lead up to publishing their research with language services as well as publication consultation services, and also everything having to do with grants and applying for competitive grant funding. And we work mainly with researchers, but we also work with publishers as well as with institutions and foundations in order to help get that research in line and in order. What was really interesting for me is about a year ago when I started playing around with GPT when it came out, much like many of you, is I started thinking about, well, how can this actually impact the world of author services, or how can we utilize this technology to get researchers from point A to point B without very slow, expensive, and inefficient processes. So I'm actually working on a new startup in addition to Academic Language Experts called SciWriter AI, where we are trying to utilize the best of the large language models, and I put an emphasis on the word language, that to use the capabilities, the language capabilities of generative AI and of tools like ChatGPT and others, to build a tool to actually help authors in the writing process, which can be a very harrowing process. 50% of authors that write a research article never write one ever again. So we must be doing something that could be done better in order to help those authors, and with a special focus on English as an additional language, because those, I think, are the authors who face the largest degree of discrimination. And I don't think anyone's purposely trying to keep them down. But I think they're not represented as they should be proportionally within the academic literature. And there's more that we need to do as a publishing industry to help them, give them those tools, not to write for them, not to make GPT the author, but to give them every ability to succeed and make sure that language is not inhibiting their progress.
And you've run a number of webinars bringing that kind of AI tools to their attention here, haven't you? I'm just sharing the visual from your AI Tool Up Tuesdays. That's been quite successful, hasn't it?
Indeed, yes. It's been quite a wild ride. We had over 4,000 people sign up for AI Tool Up Tuesdays, researchers and publishers from around the world. And you can still sign up. All the sessions are now finished, so it's actually everything's on demand and available. But it's SciWriter AI tools for research. And what the goal is that in each session we go over one kind of use case. So whether it's research discovery or research writing or image generation, knowledge processing, out of a belief that once we drill down to the specific use cases that can be had for AI, actually there's a lot of value that can be had there. And we can get out of this world of talking about, well, is it going to take our jobs? And will it become, satiant? And like all these big questions, I prefer to ask the question of, well, where can it actually be helpful and effective? Where can we rely on it? Where don't we have concerns about research integrity? And then let's think about how to use it in the most effective way possible to really, push the research process forward.
Yeah. So, and what's next now that AI Tool-Up Tuesdays are finished?
Yeah,
Like
that's a
like
really good
tongue
question. I
twister.
mean, really, the whole thing was a build-up for, to try and build an audience around SciWriter AI, which we're still in alpha mode and we're building out the prototype. So we hope that that will be ready in the next few weeks, and then we'll, do some beta testing with some early adopters, some of the folks who are in the AI Tool-Up Tuesdays sessions, and get their feedback as to what worked well, what didn't work well, what were some of the issues. And then hopefully be able to really roll that out to institutions really across the world over the next year or two.
Amazing. So you'll have a busy couple of years ahead with that.
Oh yeah, never boring here.
Great. Thanks so much, Avi. Let's get our next guest on, Wes Beard from Conversable. Now, there's been quite a lot of AI-related events in scholarly publishing industry lately. But I thought we'd jazz things up a little bit by having Wes join us from outside the publishing industry. He runs a automated messenger company. Do I say this correctly? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what Conversable does?
Thanks for having me, Romy. So yeah, my name's Wes. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Conversable. We're a B2B SaaS technology business. We specialize in online chat technology. So we take a very industry-specific focus. At the moment, we work across 3 key industries. Those are automotive, dental, and recruitment. So very unrelated industries, but all have needs for chat in different ways. We do also have some custom solutions for enterprise. So we've worked with clients in the past, such as the BBC in the UK. We're working with a large global charity at the moment, and we've worked for sort of luxury cruise ship company called Celebrity Cruises. So we tend to get our fingers into quite a few different pies of all things online chat. But as you can see on the slide there, we take very much a multi-channel approach as well to our technology. So we're very much believers of make sure your product is in front of the user, where the user is spending their time, and therefore we build solutions that sit across web, WhatsApp, and Messenger at the moment.
And the idea is to make the user experience better because you're going to where the user is rather than forcing the user to where you want them to be. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, if you take the UK as an example, one of the largest markets for WhatsApp at the moment, over 30 million adults are using WhatsApp on a daily basis. I'm sure if anyone on this webinar is from the UK, they probably have WhatsApp on their phone. And yet many organizations struggle to sort of leverage the power of those apps as an organization or a business that's typically used in sort of private mode. So we enable businesses to do that. Likewise with Messenger, it's very much a US app that's very popular over there. So yeah, exactly as you say, Romy, it's just about being where the user is.
So the messaging app as such doesn't use AI. So what have you got planned that's AI related?
Yes, there's a couple of things we're working on at the moment. One of which is basically a live feature now. We put it live in the last month, and it's very much focused in the retail industry. So what we're looking to do is give people a really rich experience against specific inventory when they're browsing a site. So if you take the automotive example, let's say someone is browsing a car retailer's website. They go onto a specific page for a used car, for example. Our technology will allow them to ask specific questions about that specific vehicle, using a bunch of data points that sit in the background, and be able to provide them information on that vehicle using sort of natural language querying and that kind of stuff. So it's sort of trying to replicate that product expert experience that you would maybe get when you're actually visiting the showroom, but in a web-based environment without the customer having to sort of search for that information. So that's one of the things we're doing at the moment, which is, as I say, live now. We are working on another project with a university in Scotland, which is sort of taking that concept but taking it to the next level. So essentially using AI to look at how consumers interact with brands up to the point that they want to purchase, and then providing a recommendation engine. So taking all of that work out of that journey that leads up to that purchase, so that a customer in theory could go onto a website and actually be proactively recommended products rather than them having to search for them. Obviously, there's a lot of areas such as data security around that, which we can maybe get into later, but it's a very interesting subject.
Great, thanks so much. I think this is a nice segue to introduce our next guest, Dustin Smith from Hum, which also looks at data, but takes also the user more into the consideration, if I understand it correctly.
I think you do. Well, so I'm Dustin Smith, co-founder and president of Hum. Hum is a customer data platform for the AI era. And so customer data platforms, how do you understand individual people and how do you learn about them so you can serve them better? And what we see is a big shift that is underway right now. The first big shift was print to digital. That's largely complete. And just like has happened in e-commerce, the first shift to the internet was how do you do mass market advertising? How do you do mass market sales? And the publishing industry sort of went a similar route, where it's how do we put this on the internet? How do we get it in front of as many people as possible? But if you go to even prestige publishers' websites, everybody gets the same sort of experience. It may be prestige content, but it's the same sort of experience, all the way down to the same sort of alerts or emails that they get. And the way that we deploy AI is by really deeply understanding content. So what is content about? And then ultimately understanding users' behavior patterns or content consumption patterns and putting those two things together. So you sort of are the sum of what you eat content-wise. And by doing that, you're able to really deeply understand people and hopefully serve them better. So personalized content recommendations, much more targeted emails, ads on down the line. But the whole idea is the ability to deeply understand people as individuals and to be able to serve them better.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm always amazed by the great marketing that you guys do as well. I think you've set up a really nice brand, so I expect that the product is as easy to use and as user-friendly in terms of an experience as well. Would you say that's true?
We try to keep a tight one-to-one correlation between how good of a job Laura does, and I believe she's on the webinar, and how well the product team does. So we try to keep it cohesive.
And how successful would you say your method's been? Have you had like some positive feedback from users? Obviously, users don't directly see what you do, right? Because you serve publishers and they then use your product in such a way that they can serve their users better. But with that being that one step remote, do you get good user feedback? We
have a fairly sizable customer success group that works very much hand in glove, I think is what the UK folks say. But we work very closely with our publishers, and so we actually see quite a bit of what they're doing. So one of the things that you can use Hum for, which you can't use many other things for, is the ability to target really tight segments of people and to use real-time live engagement campaigns, so sort of messaging on site, to be able to do things like author and reviewer and editor recruitment. And so those are sort of things where we're basically helping customers directly. The things like personalized content recommendations. Those are all it's working well. I think we have over 25 customers now. And people who are scaling it out to over 100 users internally at a publisher. And so our broader goal is to put data and AI on every desk. So really to democratize it. And the ease of use and design language that we telegraph through marketing is really translated to the product. So we want anybody who basically can use an internet, who can browse the internet and use an internet app to be able to use our product, because there's so much rich, valuable intelligence in that data. And so it's very useful for them to be able to put it to work day to day.
Great, and then maybe user feedback is something we can dig into in the discussion a little bit as well. Let's get our final guest onto the webinar. Thanks for the intro, Dustin. Please welcome everyone. Welcome Christian Grubach. the founder and co-CEO of Kronos Hub. I obviously know absolutely nothing about Kronos Hub and what it does, right? Joke aside. So Kronos Hub is an open access management platform that tries to make things easier for authors, works with publishers, funders, and institutions. And Christian, as I said, is the founder and co-CEO. You've built up the company, created an amazing team. Tell me, Christian, what is the most exciting thing that you've built for Kronos Hub?
Well, I mean, I'm absolutely excited about our entire platform, of course, but recently, what we've been putting a lot of work into is data extraction, and namely extracting information, metadata out of the manuscripts themselves. Arvi was talking about some of the hurdles the researchers need to get through, and in addition, they also have to go through systems that require them to re-enter a lot of the information that they're given. Doing that will have consequences down the line, both for acceptance, but also key funding and anything else. So what we're doing right now, and what we've been able to test quite successfully in a production environment, is extracting information from the manuscripts themselves and enriching them with identifiers such as ROR, Ringgold, Fundraef, to make sure that the researchers are properly recognized, but also given access to things like read and publish deals if the publishers, if their institution has a deal with the publisher in question, we can also guide them on what is your best fit for a journal, and basically transforming it all into a machine readable format, which can be used later on. So what it basically does is it reduces the submission process down to validation of the data that you were expecting to see. And that's definitely helpful both for the researchers, but also for the publishers who can abandon some of the validation checks that we will do later on to make sure that the manuscript actually corresponds with the information given.
Thanks, Christian. And you can see that there on the screen as well, as an example. Do you want to talk a little bit about how it was built and what was used to train the AI?
Yeah, so we've trained our model. I mean, we're using several different models, and so we've trained it with actual submissions, and being able to compare that also to acceptance data. So to see what is, I mean, that gives us an opportunity to look at, what's the correlation between a submitted manuscript and something that ends up being accepted, which again opens up for new use cases like journal matching, acceptance probability, transfer recommendations, so on. So it's definitely been being able to train on actual manuscripts has been key. The models are great. I mean, we've heard references to large language models numerous times. They will do a lot, but they also need to understand the context that we're working within. And I mean, a very practical thing is harnessing the creativity of these models so that we don't end up inventing rather than just stating what's there.
Thanks so much. I think that's it for the intro. I do realize I didn't pull up Dustin's visual. I'm so sorry. So
there's the whole reason
Dustin,
we were
here. Briefly talk about this. I'm sorry.
Just to hop this. Well, I mean, one of the things we're doing is a lot of building and a lot of talking to publishers, and so we've turned that into a white paper where we're giving a broader orientation to what we really see are the advancements in AI and deep learning, particularly over the past sort of 5 years that underpin this latest wave, and then picking through a lot of the the potential applications and promise going forward. And so this is a nice complement to the sort of Tool Up Tuesdays in a single document, and we should be dropping it early next week. But the link there will get you to a sign up page to get it when it's ready.
Brilliant. Looking forward to that. I'm sorry, I just forgot. Right. I hope everyone can come back on camera as we'll dig into the discussion. We've had some chat queries already, which I haven't looked at and I think has been replied to. So if you have a link for your report that you're about to release, feel free if it's already out to put it in there as well if people want to look at that. One of the things that I thought we could then dig into first, in the context of using AI for a better user experience, is integrations. Do you think those are important for making user experience as good as possible using AI? Who wants to get started?
I think yes is the short answer. I mean, there was a piece that came out in the Scholarly Kitchen a few weeks ago on silos within an organization. And if you have an incomplete view of an individual person, then you have a much harder time in building really elegant user experiences. And it's really just knowing a sort of whole person in the digital sense that is good fundamentals for doing that. You can incrementally improve the user experience. So if you just take something like a publishing platform, or in Wes's case, an auto sales platform, you can gather sort of local intelligence and deliver incrementally better experiences. I think the people who are furthest ahead are really thinking, how do you unify the full picture up in order to get the best data in something like a single customer view in order to drive a better sort of experience and get to the place where you're anticipating what they need, sort of like Wes was talking about with putting the right products in front of them. It's building user journeys and pathways and putting things in front of people, as opposed to basically having sort of static websites where the incumbency is on the user to browse or search for exactly what they need. It's you being a little bit more proactive. And you can do a better job at that when you understand what people have bought, who they are, where they're from, and more information about them, which is often contained in multiple systems, since there's no super system that does everything super well, even though
do you, for Hum specifically, you import that information into your platform, but then also have integrations with running, I imagine, user statistics to be included as well?
Yeah, so we will do direct observation of users on platforms where behavior is happening, so things like websites and publishing platforms. But then we integrate into CRMs and data warehouses and other places where valuable data sits, and it's really pulling those things together. So a CDP, like one of the fundamental core things, if you don't do integrations well, you're not a CDP. It's just it's like part of the package. But many other systems to do a good job will have to do some sort of integration. Like Wes obviously has to integrate with things like WhatsApp and Facebook Marketplace. So I think
that's been a breeze for you, hasn't it?
I'm sure.
Wes, that's been a breeze for you, integrating with WhatsApp and Messenger.
Yeah, and I think we're living in a world now where there's just so much out there in terms of SaaS products. People get fatigued, organizations and their users get fatigued, and I think we all probably have experienced that at some point, where we have 15 tabs open on our browser, and we have one for Canva, one for HubSpot, one for our email marketing, one there's the list is endless. So we always, I would say, speaking honestly, as a SaaS business, we have a much higher churn of customers where we don't have that integration in place, and that's why we specifically focus on integration partners. Again, to give an example, within recruitment, we have an integration with a system called Bullhorn, which is probably the world's biggest recruitment agency CRM, company based over in Boston. They have about 10,000 clients. And we know that the only way that they'll find value in that is by having our solution embedded into theirs. Because going back to Dustin's point, having that single source of truth is extremely valuable, just being able to join all those data points together. And then obviously you overlay that into then the multi-channel piece as well. It can, it does nothing but improve both the customer experience, which is obviously important, but the client experience as well.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here and say that I think, what Wes and Dustin are addressing, which is really important, is seeing the full picture of the, of the researchers and the users and how we can improve that. And I think, there's, on a very basic level in scholarly publishing, just making that user experience better on a baseline level, I think would be really critical. Then the customization on top of that could really make it a big win. I want to bring up a topic which is close to my heart and I think is really important in this conversation, which is the localization of that user experience, right? So it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to make this really powerful system, and then we have the all the sophisticated user language. But if we're not thinking about who our users are and where they're from and whether they're going to be able to understand the copy, A, and B is the design going to speak to them? Does it relate to what they're used to? Then I think we still might lose, meaning we might have a really clear picture of who the user is, but might strike out entirely when it comes to actually addressing that user. And one example that I like to look at specifically in this is Uber. Uber's entire business growth model was around localization, right? They said, how are we going? We've got this great, basic, simple concept and idea, but how do we get people to trust that they should ride in someone else's car? That's a pretty, right? We wouldn't have done that 15 years ago. So how do we do that? And their approach was, well, if I go onto the app and it feels local, it feels like trustworthy, and it's in my language and I can understand it, well, I see someone's taking that time and it feels like it's my next door neighbor taking me, as opposed to, I don't know, someone who I've never met before. And that was a critical part of that. So I've always kind of felt that if there were publishers that sort of took the language approach and really made sure that all their content was localized in an intelligent and even creative and intelligent way, they could really get market share that other publishers are missing out on, because they just assume, well, you're writing your article in English, so of course everyone must be fine in English, and let's just go from there.
I think
Avi, what you're pointing at here is really important. I would maybe extend it also to include context. I mean, besides localization, segmentation is great. It's very important to have, but how do we use that segmentation? How do we provide you with what you need here and now? And this is where sort of the chat assistants are great examples. And I mean, looking to e-commerce, who spend more than a decade understanding omni-channel to, I don't think they've actually made it yet, but they're trying. And we need to do somewhat the same. We need to understand why you're here, where you came from, what your intent is, how far down the funnel are we actually when we start talking to you, and what's the language we're using when we address you at that point. So really understanding that, because you mentioned that a lot of researchers, or was it 50% you mentioned, will write only one article in their career. Now, how am I to know how to get through that? And how are you going to help me? How are you going to assist me? And that's where I really like the idea that Hum is taking here, understanding how somebody like me works. So the whole lookalike audience will help me get a customized, context-driven experience without me having to serve you tons of data before you start recognizing who I am. And we need to use that. And then we can apply AI on top or below. AI is not driving it. I think the data is driving it, and then the AI makes it what it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you get to a place where you're deploying AI at scale in production, you're going to quickly find that data is a key component. And one of the notions is, like, you can have a super smart brain, but if it's starved of sensory experiences of a sort of nervous system, then it's not going to be very useful. And it's ultimately when you combine those two things together, where you have effectively a brain to think on things, that you're able to cache that out. And so the data part comes, like we'll work with people who are early on in their data journey and they're doing prototyping. And they're like, yes, everybody's using ChatGPT in the in the web user interface. And then once they get further forward, it's understanding, well, that's just a part of the sort of overall delivered experience. And ultimately, the chat interface isn't, it's excellent for some things, but it's not sort of panacea for all the user experiences.
Yeah, and I'm curious about how all this data is used. Maybe Wes, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, maybe this is a very personal experience, but I've been trying to book some flights recently, and all these chats are popping up, and they're all AI, and they're really proud of it. And it is a pain in the rear because I have a specific question. It is giving me to some like generic, FAQ page, which 90% of the time doesn't have the answer to my question anyway. And it almost feels like some of these attempts, the early attempts to use these chatbots, almost do more damage than good. So I'm curious to kind of hear your take, especially in the scholarly publishing context, because let's be honest, the researchers tend to be how do we put this nicely, a more conservative audience, which is slower adopters to technology, right? So how do we do it in a way which is going to be helpful to them, not turn them off?
Yeah, I mean, we've had firsthand experience of this. When we started out in 2017, I was talking to people about chatbots. They never heard of the term, and here we are in 2023, and I think it's flipped on its head now. I think everyone knows what a chatbot is and what it can do. And back in those days, the technology was really quite archaic, and we personally had issues as a business trying to provide technology that was effective from an AI point of view in answering queries effectively. And yet you have 50% of people that have a good experience and 50% that have an absolutely atrocious experience, and that can obviously reflect badly on your brand. I think what I would say is that the technology is moving at such pace now. It's actually scary how quickly it is developing, to the point that I think this is actually another challenge, is that people are struggling to keep up with it. So I think regulation is struggling to keep up with it, as an example. But as these large language models gather more and more data, people get a better understanding of how they can use that data. I think natural language is key, understanding user intent. What are the data points within that intent that will drive that response? And then providing that context further down the conversation to be able to sort of reference back previous questions. That's sort of stuff we're starting to see now. I don't think it's there yet. I would agree with you. I think there's still some work to do. I remember Expedia made a big hoo-ha about how they were one of the first to integrate ChatGPT. I don't think the initial launch went terribly well for them. But I do think over time, I think quite quickly we'll start to see that experience improving. So I think in terms of sort of applying that to the publishing, obviously my background isn't in that arena, but I think it's really about getting those people involved in the process. That's what we do with our clients. It's sort of working with those people almost in a soft environment, in a beta environment, I guess, to sort of be actively using these products, feeding back. Because obviously the more feedback and the more data you can sort of put back into the engine, as it were, the more effective it will run. I think that applies to any industry.
Yeah,
Romy, there was a question.
Back to the user testing from earlier. We talked about. Yeah, there was a question in the chat for you, Wes, about applying the searching potentially to journal article searches.
Yeah. So again, that technology is happening right now. We're applying, so going back to the inventory example that I'd mentioned before, where a customer would be able to sort of query up a specific vehicle. There is another functionality which I didn't mention, which is taking that sort of at the more holistic level, so actively searching for inventory. So you could go onto a website and you could say, I'm looking for a blue Toyota Corolla, probably a bad example, and it will start to drill down and give you recommendations based on that intent. So that stuff is happening at the moment. I don't see any reason why, if the data exists, again, it comes back to the data really, and how I think the other important point actually is how the data is structured, because one of the things that we find across different industries is data can be structured in very different ways. So we're very lucky in automotive, for example, that we use a database called CAP HBI. It's the vehicle database for the UK, has 150,000 vehicles, and the data is all very structured and it sits in the same format in the same way. Whereas in recruitment, a job description is essentially can be different from company to company. There's no industry standard in terms of how that data is stored and therefore how it can be referenced. So when you're talking to different companies, it's all sort of working in different ways. And I don't know how the publishing industry works, but that would be sort of the thing that I would say can really advance how cleverly these AI models can work, is how do you structure that data at an industry level, not at an organizational level, and make that consistent and effective so that everyone understands how to manipulate it.
We talked a little bit about localization, and Avi, I'm curious to hear from you, because you talked about not just translation, but also design in relation to making it local, giving it the local flavor. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when we think about user experience, we tend to think about, we try to break it down into different aspects. And some localization is usually thought of as like, just a language piece, but actually there's a lot more to it. And in terms of, color scheme or fonts or, how much text is on a page, that really can differ from country to country. And again, there have been some studies around this that folks are 70% more likely to buy. This is on e-commerce websites, so I don't, we'd have to check in Scholarly Publishing, but are more likely to buy if a website is localized, as opposed to if you have one generic website that's kind of one size fits all. So I know that can probably sound like a very intimidating proposition. Well, all of a sudden you're going to have to customize everything for everyone, and that's a lot of investment in time and effort. What I would say is, think about either your top current audiences, or maybe, using Hum's help, you can figure out your top potential audiences where you want to try and deliver more value and attack, and then start with those, right? You don't need to be trying to hit everyone where they are, but if you can figure out, 3 or 4 places, then I think you really can make a big impact. Mm-hmm. So yes, I would say it's the combination of, design, user ability, also level of engagement. How much do you expect, right? What's the level of trust in the AI tools? So for example, a study that I saw recently, which I think is really interesting, is there are certain countries that are quite, prominent when it comes to scholarly publishing. So for example, India, China, they are very, well, we can call it early adopters or believers in AI technologies, whereas us Europeans tend to be a lot more skeptical, a lot more concerned about personal privacy and issues relating to where our data is going and how it's being used. So let's keep in mind, I think even McKinsey came out with a report about this, and I can try and dig it up here while someone else is talking, but let's just try and keep in mind who the audience is and whether or not AI is going to be, they're going to see that as an opportunity or a threat. Now, we don't need to come out and say this is an AI product, but just these sort of automated processes, we need to make sure that they are welcomed and invited by the user and not seen as a threat to their personal privacy and data.
I'm going to challenge that and say that surely if it's something is well designed, it would work and be intuitive and provide a good user experience regardless of the culture and where you are. And equally, the AI should be used underneath in a way that it's not necessarily obvious that you're using AI. It's just making the experience better.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think good AI is behind the scenes and is under the hood and not in your face. But again, let's get back to the simple chatbot example. you know, at the end of the day, when when the metal hits the road, someone, you know, you have, if we're trying to do here is automation, right? And we're trying to and efficiencies. So, and we're expecting some sort of human you know, machine interaction that needs to go smoothly, because the level of patience that I'm going to have with that is going to be probably a lot lower than I would if I was having a real customer rep on the other side of the line. So at a certain point, I think, you know, there's no way to totally automate it. Obviously, the more seamless, the better.
I think one of the things you're going to see over the next 18 months is an introduction of more synthetic media to try to better, and I think we have talked about this a little bit before, but to better serve an audience. And the centrality of the research paper is, you know, something that's been very durable, but it's not necessarily the most user-friendly of an artifact. It's good at containing and structuring knowledge, but not necessarily at delivering things like, what are the key insights, what are the key advancements. You do have to spend quite a bit of time to extract that, and even things like expert summaries or lay summaries targeted at different audiences. Different people want different things from an individual article or group of articles. And one of the things that is going to be sort of revealed to be user facing will be some of those synthetic media. You're absolutely going to see those branded as these are AI generated. Even you know, even ones that are validated with human in the loop. You know, publishers are going to want to sort of fall back of saying, this is AI generated, this is human validated, this is a high quality product, but it ultimately did not come from purely human construction, and there's a sort of trust element in that. One of the things that you're also going to see is a shift towards quality and interpretability and validity. And this industry, I think in particular, is going to be heavily focused on that. So people who are offering models or models plus you know, access to fact stores and validation are going to ultimately, you know, be in higher demand, because publishers are going to have a pretty high bar for what's ultimately delivered there.
So I'm going to go back to some of the questions we've looked at before, and I'll throw one out for you to think about. What are the most innovative uses of AI for improving user experience that you've seen out there, either in publishing or generally from other organizations?
I think for me, the one that's really struck me, and it's not one that we're using in our business, but just a ChatGPT demo, maybe people have seen it, is the ability of GPT-4 now to be able to understand image content and then relay responses back based on that. So the example I saw, and you can probably find it on YouTube somewhere, was somebody struggling to get the seat down on their bike. And they sent a picture of their bike to GPT-4 and said, how do I do this? And it replied back to say, well, you could use a screwdriver and Allen key, but I need to see a close-up picture to be able to advise you on that. They send back a zoomed-up picture, and it comes back and says, you can use an Allen key. And then they send a picture of their toolbox with all of the panels opened up and said, okay, which tool do I need for this? And it's full of screwdrivers and spanners, and then there's an Allen key, and GPT responds back, circling the Allen key to say, use this one. So that kind of stuff, when you think about, that's a very simple example, obviously, to demonstrate how the technology works, but the applications of that across retail, healthcare, you know, it's really quite mind-boggling what that could do. So I think, yeah, for me, that was probably the kind of real wow moment.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned this, Wes, because I remember doing a talk 6 years ago when Google first released its context-based search. So I would search for Paris, and then I would search for a restaurant. Afterwards, it would know that I'm looking for a restaurant in Paris, and everybody's minds were blown by this. And now 6 years later, I don't even have to think about how to repair my bike. I mean, that's just the, you know, where it's going. And I would love to say, because we do, I mean, our focus is on the workflows and making those as easy as possible. The data extraction piece that I mentioned that's just an enabler. That needs to be under the hood. And I would actually like to challenge that. If you have to say AI about your product, you're really putting emphasis on something else than the actual product. And I think that's where, you know, most people struggle now, because you hear AI powered this, AI powered that. I still think that a good user experience is one you don't even notice. So if you didn't think about whether you were chatting to a bot, an AI, or a human, we've actually succeeded. So don't make me think, I think is the, you know, the most powerful phrase, because if I don't have to think, you've succeeded. So when we focus on the AI, is like whenever a new technology was introduced, you had to build using this technology, no matter what you were building. Now it all has to be AI powered. So really, you know, using it where it fits best and where it serves the audience best is, to me, key when we think about where to use AI and where to, you know, use the traditional tools that we have available to us as well.
Well, I would just ask, Christian, then, like, I agree with you, but I wonder, I think maybe there's this dissonance for the publishing industry, because on the one hand, in terms of user experience, yeah, the less we know, the better. On the other hand, when it comes to the publishing process, it's like, I think most publishers would agree, like, the more we know, the better, right? Do we want to aim to get to that same point of not knowing the difference, and what are the risks there?
No.
So, you know, it's this weird kind of like, it depending on which part of the workflow you're in.
Absolutely. I mean, okay, that's a fair point, Avi. What I would like to do is, what I would like to see is, a researcher doesn't have to be an expert on publishing. They have to be an expert researcher, not an expert publisher. The publishers need to be experts in publishing. And if we can collect all the data, if we can provide a good user experience whilst collecting the data, which will allow systems like Hum, other systems to organize this data and construct a better experience through context or segmentation, I think that's a success. My point goes to, or my statement goes to, when you're focusing on the technology more than the problem or the solution, that's where I think things go off the rails, because it's AI for the sake of AI. And most of what I've seen in pitch decks and other things, you know, if you buy an OpenAI subscription, you can now call yourself an AI company, and maybe you can raise money at a higher valuation. I don't know. I mean, but it is a problem when the technology becomes the centerpiece and not the experience or the data that is underlying.
I totally agree with you, Christian. I think we're living in a world now, like you say, you know, AI companies everywhere are raising a huge amounts of money, and they're just using large language models that currently exist on the market, and we're forgetting about the user. You know, what's the problem that this technology can solve for the user? And I think, you know, to your point on publishing, we see this in other industries as well. You know, we want to make sure that car dealers can focus their time on selling cars. You know, I think previously in the industry, if you were to speak to the average salesperson or sales manager, 80% of their time is actually not spent selling cars. 80% of their time is completing finance applications online, speaking to the manufacturer, trying to comply with standards. So it's trying to sort of take away those barriers and making people more productive in the jobs that they're supposed to do for people.
I agree, and we can apply a very real example from scholarly publishing. A researcher has to do more than just get their paper published. They also have to keep compliant with funder policies, national policies, institutional policies, and we're putting a lot of weight on them to figure this out, and they cannot ask the publisher, and the publisher wouldn't know necessarily, so they have to go and ask their funder as well, and potentially their institution. So if we can build the logic that will give them some of these answers and keep them safe in the process, that's where, you know, you just have to know so much. And, you know, it's amazing to me that we haven't organized it better yet.
And Avi, would you argue that a researcher's job isn't necessarily to write the research, but just do the research, and that writing it is an obstacle for them?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important question because I think until recently we weren't able to, parse out writing with, with doing the research because it was kind of it was seen as one job. I would argue, and I think the whole premise of the startup that SciWriter is based on is that as, a society, as taxpayers, as the government, as funders, we want our researchers in the lab doing the research the same way that Wes wants his car salesman doing the car sales. Now, the challenge, and I don't think that anyone would argue that, having every researcher add every comma is really what's needed. That being said, I think the fear, which is important to recognize on the publisher part, is, well, if we all of a sudden allow this, ability for authors to, let's say, not have written every word, which, by the way, is already happening with, science writers. This isn't a new thing, but it will just be more automated. Well, then will that open the door for more paper mills, for more fraudulent publications, for more problematic, even data that's manipulated or that's fraudulent, right? And do we have the systems in place to actually, find that and either catch it before it gets published or retract it if it does get through? And I think that's why some of the publishers, especially early on, for example, Science, were kind of had this stance of, well, we're just not going to allow AI, tools within our publications because the risk reward is just not there for us. The risk is just too high. What I think that missed is the fact that, well, this is going to become part and parcel of our workflow to the point where we don't even know when we're using AI. We're going to be using these tools similar to the way we use Google. So the same way we can't exactly tell researchers, well, don't use Google, or tell us when you're using Google. I think the same thing applies here. So really, we need to come up with more sophisticated policies that, dig down a little bit deeper. But yes, when it comes down to it, I think that the heart and the of the data and the, methodology, and obviously needs to come from the researcher, all what I call the scaffolding that's around that, which is essentially what Dustin alluded to. Right now, the accepted publication form is the article, right? So we need to create that scaffolding. But first of all, that may not always be the case. We may move to alternative forms. And number two is, even if that does stay the case for the meantime, I don't think there's any reason to force researchers, especially English as additional language researchers, to work in that way when they're, as long as they're taking responsibility for it at the end of the day.
And you've pushed very hard for this responsible use of AI. I mean, not saying that there aren't any pitfalls and we should use everything. And I remember the session at CSE where we met, there was the example that, if you put your unpublished article into ChatGPT, it's now part of the corpus. And you shouldn't really be sharing it anywhere until, it's in a shareable form and you've agreed to do that. So I think it's a lot of making sure that researchers know how they can use the tool and what is responsible and what is not, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely meaning I definitely am an advocate for education before policy, meaning there's one thing, you can slap up a disclaimer on your website, and every time someone submits an article, they have to check off that they're, are using it right. But the question becomes, is that just one more thing we're adding to the researcher's plate to do, which they're not really looking at and just, is slowing down the process? Or do we take, and actually kudos here, I believe, ACS was the first ones to do this, to actually put together an educational document with best practices for how to and not to use, and what are the advantages and what are the pitfalls. And I think that's the approach that I've been pushing for. So yes, I mean, definitely think that AI should be used responsibly, but I don't think responsible use means banning and policing. I think it means educating.
I think the ironic thing about some of this stuff at the moment is there are companies cropping up who are basically solving those problems at the moment in terms of trying to detect articles that may have been created using ChatGPT, for example, and then surprise, surprise, those models that are trying to address those issues are AI. So we have it's an interesting world right now where there's a world where these sorts of, I guess, more public large language models are being used to create content which is potentially being copyrighted. And Elon Musk was on an interview recently with New York Times, which I would highly recommend you watch, where he was basically talking about, anyone that says that these things aren't using copyrighted material, it's basically a lie. Now, what's interesting is that there are companies now appearing who are using AI to combat that. So they're using these models and algorithms to basically detect where that stuff's happening and preventing it. So it's a bit of a kind of good versus evil, I guess, going on, but it's all being driven by the same technology, which is quite interesting.
And I think that's where a lot of the discussion around AI and scholarly publishing has been, is about this detection and making sure we can tell what's what. Rather, and I specifically actually want to focus a little bit less on content generation rather than other uses, positive uses of AI within the workflow to improve user experience, because that's where I really see there's advantages to make things better. In one way, you could say, yeah, it should be so good that you can't tell you're using AI. I'm conscious of time, so I think we're going to wrap up. I just want to give each of you a chance to maybe quickly say something about where you think the organization or AI in general is going to head next, or what do you see coming for 2024. Dustin, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I mean, I think we didn't fully pick up, Wes's analogy for scholarly publishing. And if we think about making researchers' lives better and more productive and potentially attracting them to work with publishers, you're going to steward their attention rather well and put the right sort of things in front of them. You're hopefully going to get them closer to things like insights and threads to pull on and those sort of things. And so 2024 for us is really going to be about putting that, sort of user-centered approach to work, combining that with some of the synthetic media and generative AI, and trying to get researchers as close to the 10 tabs as opposed to 100 tabs sort of lifestyle, and allow their machines to be healthy and free.
Avi?
Yeah, I mean, our immediate focus is first and foremost to ensure that researchers, again, for whom English is an additional language, can easily basically take straight from their lab notebooks and almost plug that in and be able to run and dictate the process, but not have to write out every word, and make it as flexible as possible. So we want them to be able to write how they want, in the style that they want, in the language that they want, but then at the output and the outcome will be an article that's recognized, and obviously they will need to take responsibility over that and review it and make sure that it's all good. And I understand that's not necessarily so simple for publishers to swallow, because it's, there is a legitimate fear around taking responsibility for the researchers over that research. So part of what we're going to try to do is also come up with self-check methods and metrics for the researchers themselves, so that some of the work that's being done in the peer review stage, which looks for some of these inconsistencies or problems with data, is actually being done already by the author in the author stage, right? So it makes the author have more power, empowers the author to have more say of the quality of the paper itself, but also allows the publishers to say, okay, and I know it's gone through some sort of quality process. I still want to do my checks, obviously, still want to send it out to peer review, but maybe some of that peer review, can be fast tracked.
Great, thanks. And Wes?
Yeah, I think I can't see this happening within the next year, but certainly over the next few years, I think it's going to be, how do we take all of these different types of AI technologies and build them together to make one sort of super solution, if that's what you want to call it. So taking that kind of chatbot experience, combining it with voice, combining it with language translation, and potentially combining it with things like the metaverse in future, where, in theory, you could be talking to an avatar as if it were a human being, asking them questions, showing them things, and having those interactive responses with what is essentially an AI. And then, you can take it into the land of robotics if you want to, maybe in the next 10 years. But that stuff is quite exciting, but also a little bit scary. But it feels to me inevitable.
Thanks. And to finish off, Christian, where do you see things going?
Well, our focus is going to be on the user experience. That's what we're doing for 24, and we will use the tools available to make sure that we can present authors with one seamless experience, all the way from having a submission ready manuscript until you're actually ready to get published. So whatever we can do to support that, whatever tools we can use to make sure you don't have to know so much about publishing and you can spend your time on your research, that's what we're going to focus on.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Thank you so much everyone for attending, and thanks to all my guest speakers. So if you haven't already joined the Chronosoft newsletter and events list, you can do that on the website chronosoft.io/newsletter. We also just launched a publisher survey that you might be interested in, that you'll see on the website, and I'll finish off with our contact details for our speakers today. If you have any questions for Wes, Avi, or Dustin, or Christian, and please feel free to drop them an email. And I know the link to the report for Dustin was shared as well on the chat, so keep an eye out for that. I'm looking forward to that. So this is the last webinar of the year. Doing some thinking about what's going to happen next year. If you've got any ideas or suggestions, please feel free to get in touch with me. Love to hear and get some feedback. And thanks everyone for joining me. Thank you.
Thanks, Remy.
Thanks.
Thanks.